So sorry for hurting your child.
Was you there? Why do you speak against it? It's the truth.
Reported that the Department of Corrections placed two-time convicted killer Scott Dozier on suicide watch.
And under sodium amytal, the maximum amount that I could have.
Number 4. Frederick Michael Baer. Frederick Michael Baer, a 41-year-old inmate at Indiana State Prison, has made a difficult and remorseful decision during his time on End Row. Despite being incarcerated for more than 8 years and facing the possibility of another 8 years of legal challenges, Baer has written a letter to his lawyers asking them to end his end penalty appeals and allow him to face the consequences of his heinous actions and be put down for good. Besides, he said, he deserves to be put down for the attempted physical hurt and knife slaughter of 26-year-old Corey Clark and her 4-year-old daughter on February 25, 2004, inside their home near the tiny town of Lapel in central Indiana. "I think about it every day," sobbed Baer during a recent prison interview with the Anderson, Indiana Herald Bulletin, adding that, "I'm so sorry, so sorry." Still, he hasn't mustered sufficient courage to send the letter terminating his appeals, even though he said he doesn't fear his demise. Baer said he has the paperwork ready to be dropped in the mail any day and that he lives day by day. At this point, as per Baer, putting down or breathing his last is just a transition for him. His lead lawyer during his trial, Jeffrey Lockwood, said End Row inmates go through a roller coaster of emotions, but defense attorneys advise against cutting short the appeals process. Lockwood, who is now a prosecutor, said that life shouldn't be considered cheap, no matter who it is. That's what he believes, and he thinks that's how most people feel.
So sorry for hurting your child. I don't expect them to forgive me. I don't expect them to understand because I don't understand.
He added that there are lots of ups and downs and emotions with the victim's family as well as their own family, and that the entire process is very emotional for everybody. Baer is confined to a small cell in a tall brick building on the prison grounds, surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. The prison holds 2,000 of Indiana's most heinous criminals, including 10 other End Row inmates. State officials estimate it costs $1 million in trial and appeal costs for a capital punishment convict. In the past 25 years, 94 criminal defendants have been sentenced to end in Indiana. 20 have been executed. 54 cases were reversed by the state or the courts. It has been 4 years since the last person was put down to his demise. Baer spoke softly, emotionally during his prison interview. Shackles and chains restrained him from ankles to wrists. Long pauses and deep breaths interrupted his comments. He choked back tears and turned away from the camera in shame and regret when talking about the slayings that put him on End Row. Baer said he was working at a construction site in Anderson, Indiana, on the afternoon of the incident. He said he was suffering withdrawal from methamphetamine. Anxiety hammered in his head. Sweat seeped from his skin despite the February chill. With evil intent, he said he left work early to drive someplace, any place, to rob, any woman to take advantage of. He drove to Lapel and parked near 2 homes. He approached one house and knocked on the door. A woman answered but cautiously kept Baer from looking inside. He asked to use her phone. He recalled that she brought him the phone, but he was trying to get in, so he dialed something and gave her the phone back. After that, down the road, he spotted a woman moving boxes outside. It was Corey Clark, wife of John Clark and mother of Jenna and Morgan. Her husband was in Florida looking for a job, and her older daughter Morgan was at school. Baer knocked on Clark's door. In his own words, he said a little girl answered the door and she went to get her mother, as Baer asked if he could use the phone. Corey Clark went to get her phone without noticing Baer was following her inside. She turned around and started to scream. Baer told her not to scream, and then everything fell apart from there. Baer said between long pauses that he tried to physically take advantage of her, and then he slaughtered her by cutting her throat. Baer won't talk about the slaughter of the 4-year-old daughter. Investigators believe she ran from the room in terror, followed by Baer, who then restrained and took her life with the knife. In the interview, Baer said through tears that they didn't deserve to be put down. He added that he really doesn't know what got into him and why he did it. He added that he's thought about the whole incident every day for the past 8 years, and about all the pain he has caused and all the hurt he has caused. He recalled remembering the words of Corey Clark's mother on the witness stand asking why, and said that he's asked himself the same question every single day for the past 8 years. Bear's double slaying conviction was not his first encounter with the crime. In 1983, his sister was slayed by her ex-husband, tragically culminating a turbulent and abusive relationship. Bear said her demise was a turning point, causing him to turn to drugs and to stealing to support his addiction. By his late 20s, he was continually in and out of jail. Law enforcement officials said he eventually became a serial physically hurter, using the ruse of needing to use a telephone to talk his way into women's homes. After his arrest in the Corey Clark case, investigators found trophy items taken from the homes of his victims. Madison County prosecutor Rodney Cummings, who tried the Bear case, said if there's one person in Indiana who should be put to end, it's Bear. Bear doesn't disagree. He said that so many people's lives have been destroyed because of what he had done, and all he can do is hope one day the family might forgive him, if that's even possible at all. He added that he doesn't expect them to understand because he himself doesn't really understand. There's no reason for a person to do that to another person. Number 3. Billy Wayne Coble. In the decades after he was sentenced to be put down for a triple slaughter, Billy Wayne Coble had plenty of time to consider how his final moment alive may play out. There was a run of appeals to commute Coble's end sentence following the 1989 slaying of his estranged wife's parents and her brother, a Texas police officer. And there was a last-minute plea to the U.S. Supreme Court to stay his Thursday execution. It was denied that same day, and prison staff in Huntsville readied a slate of lethal injection drugs to put down the 70-year-old. Coble left a long, baffling trail of wreckage over the slayings and the kidnapping of his estranged wife, Karen Vischa, whose 3 daughters and nephew he tied up in their home before the abduction. On Thursday evening, he was asked if he wanted to provide any last words. The Associated Press reported. He did. "That'll be $5, Coble said, a possible reference to his nickname $5 Bill. He told gathered family that he loved them. "That'll be $5, he repeated and nodded, adding, "Take care." He began to gasp and snore. The cryptic words still hung in the air when chaos overtook the chamber observation room. Coble's son Gordon pounded on the observation glass window, cursing and shouting, "No," the Houston Chronicle reported, and soon after, his son Dalton joined in the fray, along with a woman the AP described as a daughter-in-law. The 3 were yelling obscenities, throwing fists, and kicking at others before they were moved to a courtyard and handcuffed by police. "Why are you doing this?" the woman asked police. "They just took the life of his daddy." As the scuffle continued outside the chamber, a single dose of pentobarbital hit Coble's bloodstream, the AP reported. He was pronounced gone 11 minutes later at 6:24 p.m., becoming the oldest prisoner Texas has executed since it resumed the end penalty in 1982. Gordon and Dalton Coble were charged with disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. The fracas was an exclamation point at the end of a 30-year legal odyssey for a man who one former prosecutor said had a heart full of scorpions. Coble, distraught over a coming divorce, kidnapped his estranged wife before he was arrested and freed on bond. But 9 days later, he arrived at Vischa's home, where he handcuffed and tied up her 3 daughters and nephew, J.R. Vischa. Then Coble drove to the Axtell, Texas home of her parents, Robert Vischa, 64, and Zelda Vischa, 60. He fatally shot them, along with their son Bobby Vischa, 39, at his home near his parents. He returned to Karen Vischa's home to wait for her return. Upon her arrival, he directly told Karen that he had taken the life of her mama and her daddy and her brother, adding that since they are all gone for good, now nobody was going to come help her. He allowed her to kiss her children goodbye before he kidnapped her again, drove her to a deserted field, and threatened to physically take advantage of her. The commotion got the attention of a sheriff, who followed in a patrol car. Coble knifed Vischa in the chin and face as he drove and crashed into a parked car in an effort to take his own life to avoid prison. He was arrested at the scene and given capital punishment by a jury decision in a McLennan County court the next year. In 2007, an appeals court ordered a new trial on his punishment, but a second jury convened and handed down an end sentence the following year. Crawford Long, a former first assistant district attorney in McLennan County who helped in the second trial, described Coble as a man with a heart full of scorpions. Kobel's attorneys criticized the outcome of the second trial, citing the state's reliance on a witness who said Kobel posed a threat despite good behavior while on end row. Earlier in 2019, they pleaded with the state to take him off end row because of his age, saying that he is now 70 years old, in poor health, and has an almost blemish-free prison record for the past 30 years, and that his execution would serve no valid purpose.
Is here on death row. It was for an act of extreme violence.
Was you there? Why do you speak again? Is it the truth?
Some family members of the victims disagreed with that notion. J.R. Visha was 11 when he was tied up and threatened by Kobel alongside his cousins. He told the AP the execution brought a sense of relief. Visha said that still, the way they do it is more humane than what he did to his family. It's not what he deserves, but it will be good to know we got as much justice as allowed by the law. Visha later became a prosecutor, inspired by his police officer father, whose life was taken by Kobel. He operates a private law practice now and has worked to get a stretch of highway near Waco renamed after his father. Number 2. Scott Dozier. Anticipating his end by lethal injection last summer, Scott Dozier said he didn't expect the end of his life to have any higher significance. He told that he doesn't have any grand expectations and said, "I think it's just done. I think it's just black." Besides, the convicted double slayer said the alternative was hardly so meaningful. Life in prison isn't a life, he said. He urged the state to go ahead. If people say they're going to take my life, get to it. Dozier, 48, was found expired at Ely State Prison, not in the new $860,000 execution chamber where he had once been scheduled to put down, but rather in his cell. Correctional officers in Ely, Nevada found him hanging from a bedsheet tied to an air vent. His end by apparent self-harm came 6 months after his planned execution was delayed for a second time. The discovery of his body marked a grim new chapter in a years-long battle over his execution, which has been intensified by the objections of drug companies that oppose the use of their products for capital punishment. The end of Dozier's life is unlikely to mark the end of this dispute. More than 7% of lethal injections nationally have been botched, according to Austin Serrett, a professor at Amherst College and the author of Gruesome Spectacles, Botched Executions and America's Death Penalty. In November, a Tennessee inmate chose to end his life in an electric chair rather than consume a fatal cocktail of drugs, which opponents of the capital punishment saw as a stark illustration of the brutality of lethal injection. When the U.S. Supreme Court declined to review the case, Justice Sonia Sotomayor dissented and called on the High Court to consider whether methods of execution violated the prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment inscribed in the Eighth Amendment. Dozier was alone at the time of his demise, the state said. When emergency medical care failed to revive him, he was pronounced gone at 4:35 p.m. Pacific Time. In federal court filings from late last year, federal public defenders representing Dozier had protested that the conditions of his confinement, including his isolation because of apparent self-harming inclinations, violated his constitutional rights. Prison officials have repeatedly denied that Dozier was mistreated and issued a stock response to his demise, pledging that the Nevada Department of Corrections is committed to building a safer community by striving to incorporate progressive best practices in all aspects of corrections. Dozier's attorney, Thomas Erickson, couldn't be reached the next day. One of his former attorneys, Clark Patrick, told the Review-Journal that he was shocked, having last spoken with Dozier earlier that week. When they discussed plans for a visit January 14, Patrick said he maintained friendly relations with all of his former clients, but that Dozier was the only one he would consider a friend. Dozier was committed to the Nevada prison in 2007 after a Clark County jury convicted him of first-degree slaughter in the demise of 22-year-old Jeremiah Miller, whose body he had sawed into pieces and placed in a suitcase. He'd also been convicted of second-degree slaughter in a separate case in Arizona in 2005. Both involved the trade of methamphetamine. Dozier waived his right to future appeals in 2016, saying he was prepared to be put down. And then he waited and waited. The poison prepared for Dozier last summer was a never-before-used 3-drug mix of midazolam, a common sedative, the painkiller fentanyl, and a muscle-paralyzing agent called cisatracurium. But the execution, which would have been Nevada's first in more than a decade, was postponed after Alvogen, a New Jersey-based maker of midazolam, filed a complaint alleging that the state of Nevada had acquired the drug by subterfuge with the undisclosed and improper intent to use it for the upcoming execution. In response, the state said the tactic was part of a guerrilla war against the capital punishment, adopting language used by Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr. in oral arguments in the 2015 Glossop v. Gross case, in which the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the use of the sedative midazolam. Nevada found support from 15 other states, from Utah to Florida, which banded together to file a brief backing plans to put Dozier to his end. 30 states use some form of capital punishment.
If Jeremiah Miller's family really thinks I killed him, they should have the opportunity to kill me.
Reported that the Department of Corrections placed two-time convicted killer Scott Dozier on suicide watch.
Makers of fentanyl and cisatracurium soon joined the lawsuit against Nevada, though U.S. District Judge Elizabeth Gonzalez found in September that only Alvogen had demonstrated that the state had acted in bad faith. In a preliminary injunction, which again halted the execution, she cited a letter in which the company had informed states that it strongly objects to the use of its products in capital punishment. The judge warned of reputational harm because of anti-end penalty sentiments within the medical community. Dozier's execution was first delayed in the fall of 2017, when a different judge objected to the use of cisatracurium based on the testimony of an anesthesiologist, who warned that the paralysis it induced could hide signs that the other two drugs then in the mix, diazepam and fentanyl, were failing. The defense's expert witness said the condemned prisoner might be able to feel himself suffocating. The state Supreme Court later overturned the judge's decision. The legal dispute was ongoing at the time of Dozier's demise. The state warned in a filing in the closing days of 2018 that the objections of private drug companies could effectively neutralize the death penalty. The state's new Attorney General, Democrat Aaron Ford, opposes the end penalty, but declined to tell the Review-Journal whether he would drop the appeals pursued by Adam Laxalt, the former Attorney General and unsuccessful Republican candidate for governor. Dozier was put on self-harm watch several times during the wrangling over his execution, though he denied in December attempting to take his own life. "The state's responsibility is to execute me," he told, adding, "I've been ready to go for 2 years now." His lawyers said in filings in U.S. District Court in Reno, Nevada, that the isolation imposed on Dozier in October had caused him to suffer physically and mentally. Medical and mental health records, however, do not document or demonstrate a mental health justification for such confinement, they argued. In its response, the state said Dozier had repeatedly promised to take matters into his own hands and end his own life if the state is unable to carry out the execution in a timely manner. His sister had aimed to provide him with an anatomy textbook with information about cutting the jugular vein, according to the state's filing, and Dozier had sought razor blades as well as smuggled drugs. State correctional policies on disciplinary segregation indicate that an inmate deemed prone to harming himself by a healthcare professional will be placed on watch. Taking of one's own life has long been a leading cause of demise in American jails, where the rate is 4 times that of the general population. In July 2015 alone, 6 black women passed away by taking their own lives in U.S. jails. According to Gerald Landsberg, a former professor at New York University's Silver School of Social Work. On average, one person takes his own life every 13 hours in Nevada, according to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which also includes resources for those who need support. Number 1. John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was a serial slaughterer and physical harmer who slaughtered at least 33 teenage boys and young men in Cook County, Illinois, burying most under his house. Sometimes known as the Killer Clown for his habit of dressing in a clown costume and makeup, Gacy had a disturbed childhood and struggled with his homosexuality. Gacy committed all the slayings in his Norwood Park home, luring his victims there with the promise of construction work or some other ruse, then physically assaulting and torturing them before taking their lives, usually by strangulation. Gacy was arrested in 1979, and the following year, he was convicted of 33 slaughters. Gacy was executed in 1994. Gacy committed his first known slaying in January 1972 after luring the 16-year-old Timothy McCoy to his house for physical intimacy. The next morning, Gacy saw McCoy standing in the bedroom doorway with a knife and rushed to attack him, wresting the knife away and knifing McCoy to his demise. Afterward, Gacy belatedly realized that McCoy hadn't been attacking or threatening Gacy, but rather was holding the knife because he had just made them breakfast. Nevertheless, Gacy discovered he received physical gratification from slaying McCoy, and later said, "That's when I realized that end was the ultimate thrill." Another of Gacy's victims was John Butkovich, an 18-year-old PDM employee whom Gacy lured to his house with a promise to discuss overdue pay. Once there, Gacy gave him alcohol, tricked him into putting handcuffs on, and then strangled him. The use of handcuffs became a frequent method for Gacy, who would sometimes tell his victims he was showing them a magic trick. Butkovich's parents were suspicious of Gacy and called the police more than 100 times, urging them to investigate him further. By the middle of the 1970s, 2 more young men accused Gacy of physical hurt, and he was questioned by police about the disappearances of others. Gacy referred to this period of his life as his cruising years, when he committed most of his slayings. Most of his victims were buried on the property, with several placed in a common grave underneath his crawl space. One of his victims, a 17-year-old PDM employee named Gregory Godzik, told his family that Gacy had earlier ordered him to dig trenches in the crawl space at his home. Gacy later told police he arranged this work to create spaces for graves, according to John Wayne Gacy defending a monster.
Here's one of dozens of examples of what he calls proof.
And under sodium amytal, the maximum amount that I could have, I've taken 3.5 hours of truth serum. It shows that I have no knowledge of the crime whatsoever. Never have had.
After Godzik went missing, his family contacted Gacy, who told them that Godzik had confided to Gacy that he planned to run away from home. Gacy took lives of several more victims during this time period. One he left alive was Robert Donnelly, a 19-year-old college student he abducted from a Chicago bus stop. After bringing him to his house, Gacy raped and tortured Donnelly, dunking his head repeatedly in a bathtub until he passed out, and performing fake executions with a gun loaded with banks. Donnelly was in so much pain, he begged Gacy to take his life, but Gacy let him go and warned him not to tell anybody. Donnelly reported him to the police, however. When officers investigated, Gacy said it was a consensual physical slavery encounter, and the police believed him. Gacy slayed another victim 1 month later. By 1978, Gacy's crawl space had no more space for bodies, according to Killer Clown, and he started to dispose of his victims in the Des Plaines River from a bridge off Interstate 55. On December 11, 1978, a 15-year-old Robert Peast went missing after telling his mother he was going to meet Gacy to discuss a potential construction job. Peast's family filed a missing person report with the police, which led to a search of Gacy's house in Norwood Park. Authorities discovered several suspicious items there, including police badges, a pistol, hypodermic needles, pornographic films, and items that they later learned belonged to some of Gacy's victims. After a lengthy period of police surveillance and investigation, police discovered a receipt in Gacy's house that had belonged to Peast, contradicting Gacy's claim that he had no contact with Peast the day he went missing, according to John Wayne Gacy defending a monster. This resulted in further searches of Gacy's house, eventually leading to the discovery of several trenches filled with human remains in the crawl space beneath his house. Gacy eventually confessed to slaying about 30 people. On March 12, 1980, after a short jury deliberation, Gacy was found guilty of committing 33 slaughters, and he became known as one of the most ruthless serial slayers in American history. After the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear Gacy's final appeal in October 1993, an execution date was set for May 10, 1994, at the Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois. Before his demise, Gacy said the victims' families would get no comfort from his demise and accused the state of slaughtering him. His last words were reportedly, "Kiss my ass," but the prosecutor who tried the case and attended his execution said Gacy didn't speak in his final moments. Gacy was executed by lethal injection. In the years since Gacy's arrest, there have been lingering concerns that Gacy might have been responsible for taking the lives of other people whose bodies have yet to be found. And when police uncovered human remains in Gacy's house in 1978, 8 bodies couldn't be identified. In July 2017, Cook County authorities used DNA evidence to identify one of these unidentified victims as 16-year-old James Jimmy Byron Hawkinson, who had been reported missing since 1976. In October 2021, DNA testing identified another of Gacy's victims as 21-year-old Francis Wayne Alexander, who also disappeared in 1976. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.